Karen always walked home late after her shifts, moving through the quiet streets with the tired confidence of someone who had done it 1,000 times before. But that night, the silence hid danger. Liam and his friends, drunk and restless, spilled out of a nearby alley looking for trouble the way they always did. Small thefts, quick laughs, easy targets. They didn't expect their paths to cross with Karen. When Liam lunged for her phone, she fought back on instinct, landing a sharp kick that only fueled his rage. His friends backed away as he struck her again and again, leaving her bleeding on the pavement beneath the dim streetlight, her breath shallow, her vision fading. At that exact moment, Larry's truck rolled down the empty road. He almost didn't see her, just a dark shape against the concrete, but something made him slow down. When the headlights revealed Karen's battered body, he slammed the brakes and ran to her side, his hands shaking as he tried to stop the bleeding and keep her conscious. He didn't yet know what had happened or who had done this. Only that her life was slipping away and he was the only one there to save her. But what came next would change everyone's fate. The attacker, the victim, and even the man who found her. Curious to know how this night unraveled into the story you are about to hear. But before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Now, let's understand how this story truly began. The neon sign of the rusty anchor sputtered twice before dying, its last flicker reflecting off a thin sheen of early morning moisture on the pavement. Karen Thompson turned the key in the lock with a practiced twist, shoulders sagging under the weight of a shift that had run too long and a life that had demanded too much. She tucked the keys into her purse, fingers trembling slightly from exhaustion rather than fear. At 2:17 a.m., this part of town felt hollowed out, shadows instead of people, broken streetlights instead of safety. She adjusted the strap on her purse and started the 3-block walk home. Her boots hit the cracked sidewalk in a slow, steady cadence. Each step echoed the last 2 years of responsibility, supporting her mother through dialysis, working late nights, sacrificing sleep for survival. A police cruiser should have passed by at least once during her walk. It hadn't in weeks. Budget cuts, reassignments, everyone pretended this neighborhood was still on the rotation. Karen knew better. Farther up the street, a matte black Dodge Charger idled under a dead lamp post. The engine ticked softly as it cooled, the sound barely audible over the clink of a whiskey bottle being passed between 3 young men. Liam Miller leaned against the driver's side door with the lazy confidence of someone who had never been told no and had never felt the consequences of anger. 20 years old, jaw still soft with youth, eyes glazed with entitlement. His friends hovered near him, restless, unmoored, looking for something to push against. "Let's find something to do," one muttered, voice low, "bore." They spotted her, an exchange of looks, quick, predatory, silent. One of the boys smirked and murmured, "Easy mark." Liam's mouth twitched upward in a half-drunk smile. He straightened, rolled his shoulders once, and crossed the street with a swagger that wasn't earned. The other two spread out behind him, not trained, not disciplined, but familiar with the mechanics of cornering someone weaker. Karen saw them too late. Their silhouettes broke from the shadows, spacing themselves just wide enough to block escape routes. "Phone. Now," Liam ordered, hand outstretched, palm open, the gesture more command than request. Karen tightened her hold on her purse. Her breath stalled for a moment, her jaw flexed as she forced it steady. "Back off," she said, voice low, controlled. She tried to step around him. He grabbed her wrist. Something snapped inside her. Not panic. Instinct. A reflex honed from a childhood in neighborhoods where hesitation cost you. Her knee shot upward in a tight arc. It missed his groin but connected hard with his upper thigh. Not enough to disable him, enough to offend him. Liam's eyes hardened in an instant, pupils narrowing, jaw locking, a cold spark of violence replacing the lazy confidence from seconds earlier. The first punch cracked against her cheekbone with a sickening thud. Her head snapped sideways, stars exploded behind her eyelids. She staggered. The second blow came faster, heavier, a wild hook that sent her crashing onto the pavement. Her palm slapped the ground, skin scraping against rough concrete. Then came the kicks, not aimed to intimidate, aimed to punish. Boots drove into her ribs, her shoulder, her thigh. Each strike knocked breath from her lungs, each impact pressing her further into the cold street. Her mouth tasted metal, her vision blurred. She curled inward, arms raised, trying to shield her head. One bow hesitated, the faintest hitch in his movement, but Liam didn't. His fury was unrestrained now, fueled by humiliation. And then, headlights tore through the darkness. A Ford F-250 screeched to a stop so abruptly the back end fishtailed. The driver's door flung open, and Lieutenant Larry Hawkins was out before the engine fully settled. Still in his camis, eyes sharp despite 36 hours of training fatigue, he moved with that unmistakable SEAL economy. No wasted motion, no hesitation. Navy, get on the ground. His voice cut through the night like a controlled detonation. The three attackers broke instantly, scattering like startled animals. They didn't look back. Larry dropped to his knees beside Karen, his breath hedged at the sight of blood threading down her hairline, pooling beneath her cheek. She tried to focus on him, eyelids fluttering, consciousness slipping. "Ma'am," he said softly, one gloved hand steadying her shoulder. "Stay with me. Help is coming. You're okay. Just stay with me." Her fingers twitched. Slowly, painfully, she opened her hand. Resting in her palm was a small brushed steel seal trident pendant, not regulation issue, but the type gifted at graduations, birthdays, family milestones. The chain had snapped, skin along her knuckles was scraped raw from tearing it free. Larry took it gently, turned it over, engraved, "To Liam. Make me proud." Dad, a muscle in Larry's jaw jumped. His breathing stalled for half a second. He knew this pendant. He had seen Captain Daniel Miller present it to his son at a barbecue on base. He remembered Miller's quiet words that day. "This isn't the trident you earn. This is the reminder to live like someone who deserves one." Tonight, Liam had done the opposite. The hum of ventilation inside Naval Amphibious Base Coronado carried a sterile chill through Captain Daniel Miller's administrative wing, the kind of chill that came from decades of discipline, procedure, and expectations carved into concrete. Lieutenant Larry Hawkins paused outside the office door, knuckles hovering for a beat longer than usual. His breath tightened in his chest, not hesitation, but the weight of the message he carried. When he finally knocked, the sound was firm, singular, decisive. "Enter," came the reply. Larry stepped inside. Captain Miller sat behind a dark oak desk, the soft glow of the desk lamp illuminating the sharp lines of his uniform. Silver hair, regulation cut, shoulders broad from years of operational command. Eyes that had once assessed hostage-takers, insurgents, and the worst the world could produce. Eyes now sharpening at the sight of one of his most trusted officers looking like he hadn't slept in days. "Lieutenant," Miller said, voice measured. "You look like hell. Talk." Larry didn't answer immediately. His jaw flexed once, a small muscle near the hinge tightening before he reached into his cargo pocket. He placed the pendant in the exact center of the polished wood. No commentary, no hesitation. Just the metallic clink of truth landing between them. Miller's gaze dropped. His pupils narrowed by a fraction, the first micro crack in an otherwise immovable facade. Larry spoke quietly. "Sir, your son and two others assaulted a civilian woman last night. She's in the ICU. Multiple rib fractures, concussion, acute blood loss. She ripped this off the attacker's neck before she went down. I found her." The room held its breath. Captain Miller didn't move for a long 10 seconds, a silence dense enough to feel physical. His fingertips hovered just above the pendant, not touching it yet, as though contact might confirm something he wasn't ready to accept. His throat worked once in a silent swallow, then he exhaled, a slow, controlled release of air from a man who had taken mortar blasts with less visible impact. When he finally lifted the pendant, he turned it over with his thumb. The engraving caught the light. "To Liam. Make me proud." "Dad." The lines of his face tightened a barely perceptible degree. His eyes did not soften, they hardened. "Is she stable?" Miller asked. Larry shook his head slightly. "Barely, sir." Another pause, a single blink, the slow kind, the kind someone uses to bury emotion before it escapes. Miller set the pendant down with surgical precision, aligning it with the grain of the desk as if restoring order to at least one thing in a situation completely out of his control. He picked up the phone. "This is Captain Miller. Get the base jack and the NCIS duty agent to my office." 10 minutes. His tone held no space for negotiation. He ended the call before the response finished. Larry's brow creased. "Sir?" Miller stood. The movement was deliberate, the posture unmistakable, the spine of a man choosing duty over blood. He adjusted the crease of his uniform jacket, a subconscious ritual of control, then looked squarely at Larry. "We're not hiding this," he said. Not 1 inch. His voice didn't rise, didn't waver. It simply carried the gravity of an officer who had spent 30 years reminding younger men that honor wasn't a slogan, it was a ledger. "Civilian courts," he continued. "You see MJ if necessary. Whatever jurisdiction claims it first, my son will answer for what he did." Larry inhaled slowly, shoulders lifting as if absorbing some portion of the weight in the room. "But first," Miller said, picking up the pendant again, "not out of sentiment, but evidence, I need to look that woman in the eye." For a moment, something flickered in him, not sympathy, something older, deeper. The understanding of what violence does, and what he had trained thousands of men to control, not unleash. Larry nodded once. "I'll arrange transport, sir." But Miller was already moving, slipping the pendant into an evidence bag, sealing it with the finality of a man who refused to let paternal instinct corrupt the oath he had sworn. He stepped past Larry, shoulders squared, expression unreadable but carved with purpose. The corridor light caught in his eyes, steel meeting steel, and for the first time since the call came in, Larry saw the full weight of what Captain Miller was about to face. He wasn't walking toward a hospital, he was walking toward the reckoning. Sharp Memorial Hospital held a particular kind of quiet in the early morning. The sterile, humming quiet built from egg rhythms, the soft hiss of oxygen regulators, and the distant roll of gurney wheels down polished linoleum. Inside room 417, the lights were dimmed to a low amber, enough to cast a muted glow across the contours of Corinne's battered face. She lay propped up at a slight incline, pillows carefully positioned by trauma nurses trained to avoid aggravating rib fractures. One eye was swollen shut, the surrounding skin darkening to a deep purplish maroon. The other eye tracked movement with effort, the pupils slow, evidence of concussion. IV lines fed into both arms, isotonic fluids, analgesics, and antibiotics, the transparent tubing catching glints of light each time she shifted the slightest fraction to ease the ache beneath her sternum. Her breathing was shallow, controlled. Each inhale was measured, her diaphragm refusing any expansion that might send fire along the broken ribs. She looked like someone balancing herself on the edge of pain's cliff, refusing to fall. Footsteps approached, not the soft shuffle of nurses, but the controlled cadence of someone trained to move with purpose. The door opened without theatrics, and Captain Daniel Miller stepped inside, wearing his dress blues. He didn't remove his cover. Protocol didn't require it in a hospital room, but he held it under his arm anyway, posture rigid, the faintest tension visible in the set of his jaw. His boots made a soft click against the tile. He didn't sit. He didn't come closer than necessary. His gaze moved over Corinne, absorbing every bandage, every contusion. For a split second, a muscle near his left eye tightened, a micro-expression he strangled down almost immediately. He exhaled through his nose, steady and controlled, the breath of a man assembling his words with absolute precision. "Ma'am," he began, voice low but firm, "I'm Captain Daniel Miller, U.S. Navy." Corinne's working eye narrowed slightly. Her throat contracted before she formed any response, but no sound came yet. "The man who attacked you," Miller continued, "is my son." Silence pooled between them, heavy and breathless. "I'm not here to defend him." Miller's fingers flexed around the edge of his cover, knuckles whitening for half a second before he regained control. "I'm here to tell you that NCIS and San Diego PD have opened aligned investigations. Both agencies are cooperating. There will be no interference from this command." Corinne's lips parted, dry, cracked, and she took a shallow inhale, the motion causing a ripple of pain across her ribs. She didn't look away from him. Her uninjured eye traced the lines of his face, studying him with a wary focus. It was impossible to ignore the parallels, the jawline, the shape of the brow, the cold steel in the gaze. The resemblance to the beau who had kicked her on the pavement was unmistakable, and something in her expression hardened. Miller continued, "Whatever you decide, civilian prosecution, military charges, or both, the Navy will cooperate fully." He paused, another tiny shift in his expression, guilt suppressed into a single deeper crease between his brows. My family will cover every medical cost. You will not see a single bill. Karen's good eye glimmered with something cold and sharp. Not anger. Something older, something carved by years of surviving what other people didn't see. She stared at him for a long moment, as if reading the truth beneath his words. Her voice, when it came, rasped like sandpaper dragged across stone. I don't want his money. Her fingers twitched at her side, the IV tape pulling slightly as she moved. Her jaw clenched enough to send a tremor along the bruised muscles. I want him to understand fear. The words were quiet, almost whispered, but they carried a gravitational pull that hit Miller harder than a raised voice ever could. His breath caught, a small, sharp intake, before he bowed his head. Understood. He didn't try to explain. He didn't offer excuses. He stood there, spine straight, absorbing the weight of her statement like a man accepting a verdict already long overdue. Karen blinked slowly, the movement careful, deliberate. Her expression didn't soften. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The heart monitor beside her ticked out its steady rhythm, indifferent to the exchange taking place in the room. Miller inhaled once, chest rising beneath the uniform that suddenly felt heavier. His throat tightened as he looked at her, a quiet acknowledgement that she had every right to want justice, not comfort. Every right to demand something his son had never been forced to learn. He took one step back, respectful, controlled. Ma'am, he said, voice barely above a whisper, you will have it. Karen stood very still as the words settled over the room like dust after an explosion. The late afternoon light broke through the blinds in narrow bands, striping Captain Miller's face and making the lines around his mouth seem deeper, carved by years of command decisions no father should ever have to make. Lieutenant Hawkins remained at parade dressed out of habit, shoulders squared, jaw locked, his right eyelid flicking in that near-invisible tick he got whenever he was forcing himself not to react emotionally. The manila folder on Karen's table felt heavier than paper ought to. She glanced at it: charge sheets, bond documents, sworn statements, each one a ledger documenting the night that had split her life into before and after. Her fingers hovered above the folder, but didn't touch it, as if contact might burn her. Captain Miller's voice carried that controlled calm unique to men who had ordered young operators into kill zones. 4 to 7 years is what the state will push, he said, tone flat, precise. Given the severity of the injuries, it could easily land at the upper end. Karen exhaled once, sharply, her ribs tightening against the memory of the hospital bed, the ache in her sigh, the sterile smell of antiseptic. She studied the captain, his posture too rigid, his breathing too shallow. He wasn't here to negotiate. He was here to surrender something. I'm not asking for leniency, he repeated, and the faint tremor at the corner of his mouth betrayed how much this cost him. I'm asking for meaning. Then came the proposal: 90 days, manual labor, minimum wage, every dollar into restitution. Not symbolic work, hard work, heat, exhaustion, dirt under the fingernails, humility scraped into the bone. Ankle monitor, supervision, zero tolerance. Karen's eyebrow twitched upward. Hawkins didn't move, but his throat tightened in a visible swallow. He knew how radical this was for a SEAL captain's son, for any officer's son. You'd put your own son through that? She asked. Captain Miller's eyes didn't waver, blue, steady, cold the way ocean water gets right before a storm. I would put him through worse, he said. If that's what it takes to stop him from becoming a monster. The room went still. Even the old refrigerator in the kitchen seemed to pause between cycles. Hawkins finally broke the silence, stepping forward half a pace. I'll supervise the arrangement personally, he said, his voice low. His hands were clasped behind his back, knuckles pale from the pressure. Karen looked away, focusing on the quiet bloom of pain in her abdomen when she shifted positions. The doctors had cleared her, but the residual soreness flared whenever she breathed too deep. It grounded her. Her gaze drifted to the photo on the wall, her uncle's landscaping crews from a summer 5 years ago. Men covered in sweat and dust, shirts clinging to them, the sun baking the asphalt around them. Real labor. Real consequences. When she finally spoke, her tone was clipped, controlled. My uncle starts a city contract Monday, median mowing, trash pickup. T-index is going to hit the 110. She let the words hang, watching Captain Miller absorb them. He didn't flinch. Tell Liam, she added, folding her arms slowly across her chest to bring sunscreen and humility. The captain closed his eyes for just a breath and exhale of acceptance, not relief. Hawkins nodded once, tightly, as though receiving an operational order. Karen didn't thank them, and they didn't expect her to. Her fingers finally touched the manila folder, the paper cool beneath her skin. A weight, but for the first time, a weight she could shape. 500 came with no softness, no margin. The sky over the city was a dull pre-dawn gray, the kind that flattened everything into silhouettes. Liam stood beside the battered crew truck, shoulders rounded forward, his posture caught somewhere between defiance and resignation. His boots were new but already dusted from the walk across the lot. The jeans were stiff, the faded company t-shirt clinging to him in the morning humidity. On his left ankle, the monitor blinked in a steady, indifferent rhythm. Green, 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 each pulse a reminder of the boundaries he no longer controlled. Karen watched from a distance, arms crossed, her weight balanced carefully on her right leg to avoid the residual pull in her ribs. The bruising that mottled her left side had begun to yellow, but the memory of the impact, the sudden violence, the loss of air still lived low in her breathing. Her expression betrayed none of it, her chin remained set, her gaze narrow. Only the faint tension in her jaw gave away the pressure building beneath her composed exterior. The foreman stepped out of the truck, a stocky man with forearms darkened by years of sun exposure. He didn't spare Liam a second glance before tossing him a shovel with a flick of the wrist practiced from 1,000 early mornings. The metal clanged against Liam's palms. "Welcome to the crew," the foreman said, voice gravelly from coffee and gasoline fumes. "Keep up, pretty boy." Liam's jaw tightened at the nickname, a subtle flex along the hinge of bone. He didn't correct it. He didn't look up. The muscles in his neck fired once, a small, involuntary contraction, the body's instinctive response to humiliation. Underneath the faded shirt, he exhaled through his nose, long and controlled, the way someone trained to mask reactions might do when stripped of rank, privilege, identity. Across the parking lot, Captain Miller stood beside his pickup truck, arms loosely at his sides, hands open but stiff. He wore plain clothes, but the command presence radiated off him with unmistakable weight. His stare was sharp, unyielding, a deliberate absence of comfort. He didn't nod or raise a hand. He simply watched, eyes cold, posture locked, creating a silent perimeter Liam could feel even without turning. For a moment, Liam's gaze drifted up, just enough to register his father's presence. It wasn't a plea and it wasn't defiance. It was something quieter, like checking a compass he no longer trusted. When his father didn't move, didn't even blink, Liam looked away with a tight swallow, Adam's apple shifting once, sharply. Karen observed the exchange from behind a row of maintenance equipment. She didn't step forward. The ache in her abdomen sharpened when she breathed too deeply, but she held herself steady. She noted the slight tremor in Liam's wrist as he tightened his grip on the shovel. A tremor that didn't come from weakness but from the weight of eyes on him, the weight of consequences finally materializing into something physical he had to lift, hour after hour. The foreman jerked his chin toward the median strip across the lot. The grass there was overgrown, the soil compacted and dry, hard ground, hard work, no shortcuts. "Dig out the old root line," the foreman ordered, "depth at least a foot." "You got all morning." Liam didn't complain. He stepped forward, shovel blade hitting earth with a dull, resistant thunk. The first scoop barely broke the surface. He reset his stance, shoulders rolling back, boots digging into the dirt for leverage. The second attempt bit deeper. He worked methodically, breathing in slow intervals, jaw locked tight enough for the muscle near his ear to twitch. The ankle monitor pulsed again. Green, green, green. Captain Miller watched, hands tightening at his sides until the knuckles turned pale. His expression remained unreadable, but the smallest movement, the hard swallow in his throat, betrayed a collision of pride, regret, and the brutal necessity of the moment. Karen shifted slightly, the cool morning breeze sweeping across the bruises on her skin. She felt no satisfaction watching Liam strain against the unyielding soil, no triumph. Only a quiet, heavy recognition. Accountability was not punishment, it was a process, and this was only day one. Liam drove the shovel into the earth again, shoulders shaking with effort. The sun had not yet risen, but sweat was already gathering along his hairline. He did not look at Karen. He did not look at his father. He just kept digging. The days didn't pass so much as grind against him, wearing him down layer by layer. Dawn came early and without softness, the light slicing across the yard before Liam's eyes were fully open. He moved on instinct, now boots on, shirt pulled over sore shoulders, ankle monitor blinking its steady signal as he stepped outside. The crew truck always waited in the same spot, engine coughing awake, men already inside with thermoses and tired eyes. They never spoke to him unless they had to. When they looked at him, it was through a narrow lens. Privileged kid, troublemaker, someone who had never known the weight of real labor until a court made him touch it. By the end of the first week, the blisters on his palms had torn wide. The salt from his sweat seeped into the raw skin, burning with every grip of the shovel handle. He wrapped the wounds with cheap athletic tape from the foreman's glove box. By midday the tape would be soaked through, peeling off in dirty strips. By week 2, the wounds began to seal, the soft skin hardening into rough calluses. Every new layer built itself under heat, friction, and the quiet humiliation of falling behind men twice his age who worked twice as fast. He never asked for breaks. He learned quickly that no one on the crew respected weakness spoken aloud. When his arms shook from fatigue, he kept working. When the sun climbed high enough to cook the asphalt beneath them, he tied a bandana around his neck and pushed through the heat index that hovered just under 110. The ankle monitor made the back of his boot rub raw, but he didn't adjust it anymore. He simply absorbed the discomfort, let it sit in the background like static. Every day began the same way: grunt work, no shortcuts. Dig the trench deeper, clear the median, load the truck with waste bags, power wash sidewalks until the nose blurred into a drone inside his skull. And every day, in the same, climbing into his bunk at the landscaping company's yard, muscles trembling uncontrollably, sleep hitting him like impact trauma. Somewhere around the 10th day, the men stopped staring at him with open contempt. They didn't accept him, they simply began to ignore him. Which, in its own way, was an acknowledgement. He wasn't collapsing, wasn't crying to go home, wasn't hiding behind his last name. And every Friday, Karen sat in her folding chair, same spot, same posture, one leg crossed over the other, a clipboard resting lightly on her lap. Her bruising had faded by then, leaving only faint reminders beneath the skin. She didn't speak when Liam approached. She didn't need to. The silence between them had weight, like the space between opposing lines before an order is given. Liam stepped forward each time, posture rigid, eyes down. His hands were rough now, knuckles scraped, dirt pressed into the deeper creases. Without ceremony, he placed his entire paycheck in her open palm. Not one cent held back, not one word offered to soften the exchange. Her thumb always brushed over the envelope, once a measured, controlled gesture, not acceptance, not forgiveness, just acknowledgement. She watched him in those moments, really watched him, studying the slight tremor in his exhausted fingers, the way his chest rose shallowly like a man pacing his air supply. He met her eyes only once in all those Fridays, and it lasted less than a second. But in that second, something shifted. Shame, maybe, or understanding. Or the first fracture in the shell he had built around himself his entire adult life. After the first month, the contempt from the crew softened into a different kind of silence. A man who showed up every day, didn't complain, didn't ask for anything. That kind of consistency rewrites reputation slowly, almost reluctantly. But Liam never celebrated it. He carried his punishment like weight on his spine. He didn't smile, didn't joke, didn't try to win anyone over. He simply worked, breath measured, movement efficient, eyes always lowered just enough to show he understood where he now stood in the hierarchy of the world. He never complained again. The envelope was unmarked, no return address, no name written on its face, just a thin rectangle of off-white paper slid neatly beneath the doorframe. Karen noticed it only because the corner caught against her slipper as she stepped into the hallway. She paused, brow tightening, a faint pulse tapping beneath the skin near her temple. For several seconds she didn't touch it. Something about the quiet intentionality of its placement made the air feel heavier, as if the house itself were holding its breath. She bent slowly, bruised wrist still tender if she moved the wrong way, and picked it up. The paper was warm from the morning sun, edges slightly curled from humidity. She turned it over once, then again. No handwriting, no seal. Just wait. She slid it open with her thumb. The letter inside was short, straight lines. No wasted loops or flourishes. She recognized the kind of handwriting produced by someone raised with rigid expectations, blocky, controlled, almost military despite his lack of formal training. She read it once, then a second time. She didn't move for nearly a full minute. "You owed me nothing. I earned what you felt that night." The words pressed against her chest harder than she expected. Not because they softened anything. Nothing about that night could be softened, but because there was no attempt to dodge responsibility. No excuses, no pleading, just admission. She felt her fingers subtly tighten around the page, the faint tremor betraying emotion she refused to name. "I see your face every time I close my eyes." She exhaled slowly, the breath catching halfway out. Her jaw locked at a slight angle, the same way it used to when she tried not to cry in front of doctors and detectives during those first days. She couldn't ignore the truth in the statement. Trauma never selected only one victim. "I'm not asking forgiveness." Her shoulders lowered a centimeter, tension shifting but not dissipating. She respected that line more than she expected. Forgiveness implied erasure, responsibility required endurance. And Liam, broken knuckles and sunburned neck and the weight of consequences shackled to him, seemed to understand that fine distinction. "I'm asking to keep becoming someone who deserves a future." Her throat tightened. She blinked one slow, controlled, allowing the sensation to settle before it could overwhelm. She could see him in her mind. Sweaty, dehydrated, clothes stiff with dirt, handing her envelopes every Friday without meeting her eyes. Not defiant, not defeated, just reshaped. Ground down to something honest. "Thank you for not writing me off the way I wrote off everything good in my life." Karen's breath hitched, just for a second. A tiny falter in the cadence of her lungs. She pressed her thumb along the fold of the paper, smoothing it unconsciously. The gesture was gentle, almost instinctive, and it irritated her for reasons she couldn't articulate. Gratitude from him felt like holding a flame, its heat both warning and illumination. She read the signature, Liam. Not sir, not mum, not respectfully, just a name. A person stripped of entitlement, writing to the woman he once dehumanized. A reaction flickered through her, a tight, cold swallow. She didn't know what she was supposed to feel, so she didn't label any of it. Instead, she placed the letter on the kitchen table and stood looking at it, her fingers absently brushing the light bruise that still shadowed her left cheekbone. She didn't sit, she didn't collapse. She simply stood there, spine aligned, breathing steady, as though evaluating an after-action report that carried emotional shrapnel. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Outside, a lawnmower droned, in the distance the usual crew beginning another shift, maybe even the same crew that had worked beside him for 78 days. Karen's eyes lingered on the final line again. Someone who deserves a future, deserve, earn, change. All verbs requiring effort, not hope. She could respect that kind of language. She folded the letter precisely, creasing the paper with a single firm motion, and slid it back into the envelope. Her micro-expressions tightened jaw, faint tremor at the corner of her mouth, breath held just a fraction too long betrayed something shifting beneath the surface, something she hadn't decided yet whether to acknowledge or reject. But she kept the letter. That alone was an answer. The 90 days had ended without ceremony, without applause, without any gesture that suggested triumph or defeat. They ended the same way they began, with silence and wait. That silence followed Liam into the courthouse like a second shadow. The courtroom was already full when he entered, escorted by 2 deputies. Rows of Navy SEALs, dress blues, formed a wall of quiet discipline, their posture rigid, chins raised just enough to project presence without aggression. Not one of them shifted. Not one blinked longer than necessary. They weren't there for him, they were there for the institution, for accountability, for the reminder that violence outside the chain of command carried consequences no rank or lineage could shield. Karen sat in the second row, her posture straight but not tense. A thin line of healed scar tissue traced under her left eye, barely visible unless one knew where to look. She clasped her hands loosely in her lap, but the slightest movement in her thumb, one slow, repetitive stroke against the other, betrayed the current running under her calm exterior. It wasn't fear, it wasn't anger, it was the kind of internal steadiness forged after surviving something intended to break a person. Liam glanced at her only once before lowering his gaze. His jaw tightened, the muscle near his ear flickering Microspasm of restraint. He took his seat at the defendant's table without lifting his eyes again. The judge entered. A gavel strike echoed. Docket called. Case number read. Formalities delivered with the detached cadence of someone long accustomed to leaves pivoting under their voice. Before sentencing, the judge said, adjusting her glasses, the court will review the documentation submitted. The clerk passed a thick binder to the bench: restitution logs, wage stubs, medical records, compliance reports. The judge flipped through them one by one with slow, deliberate scrutiny. Every page term was a kind of verdict. Total restitution paid, $11,340. She paused. No one moved. Medical expenses, satisfied in full. Another pause. Ongoing therapy and trauma counseling, funded. A murmur rippled through the gallery, but died instantly under the weight of military eyes. Miss Thompson, the judge said, you may speak. Karen rose smoothly. Her knees didn't shake, her voice didn't quiver. She kept both hands clasped behind her back, as though addressing an officer rather than a judge. I'm not here to ask for mercy, she said, tone even, steady. A faint tightening at the corner of her mouth suggested discipline more than emotion. I'm here to confirm he worked every day, every hour. The court can choose probation or prison. I accept either. The judge studied her for several seconds, long enough to register the controlled breathing, the unwavering eye contact, the groundedness of someone who had already made peace with any outcome. Thank you, Ms. Thompson. Karen sat. Next, the judge continued, we addressed the matter of the trust fund. A shift ran through the seals, not movement, but a collective tightening of their presence, like air pressurized in a sealed room. Counsel, the judge said, I have reviewed the voluntary civil settlement negotiated between Mr. Miller, the trustee, and the victim. Captain Miller, seated behind the defense table, lifted his chin a fraction in acknowledgement that this, too, was part of accountability. His eyes remained forward, unblinking. The agreement is legally sound, the judge continued. The court notes the following terms, signed by all parties. She read them as though marking milestones in a transformation. First, Mr. Liam Miller has voluntarily relinquished all beneficiary rights to the trust. Liam didn't move, but his fingers curled slightly against the table, knuckles whitening. Second, the trust's fiduciary has restructured the assets in accordance with state civil code and ethical compliance. A measured breath left Captain Miller slow, controlled, a man accepting the financial cost of repairing moral damage. Third, a portion of the trust has been redirected to establish the Victim Restitution Foundation. Several seals straightened, recognizing the magnitude of that line. Fourth, Ms. Karen Thompson is named as the foundation's inaugural beneficiary. Karen did not react outwardly, but a faint exhale slipped through her nose, almost imperceptible, the body recognizing stability even if the mind refused to rely on it. And lastly, because the agreement is voluntary and fully compliant with civil law, this court simply ratifies what all parties have already signed. The judge closed the folder. Mr. Miller, stand for sentencing. Liam rose. Shoulders square, chin slightly down, hands clasped behind him, an unconscious imitation of the military men surrounding him. This court sentences you to 5 years felony probation, 1,000 hours of community service, permanent civil relinquishment of all trust benefits. A deputy stepped forward. The judge nodded once. Proceed. Captain Miller stood at attention as his son was fingerprinted, not a single twitch in his jaw. No break in eye contact, no plea for reconsideration. Only a rigid acceptance, an officer witnessing his son bear the weight of choices made and consequences earned. When Liam was led away, Karen watched without blinking. Her hands tightened, only once barely visible but enough to show she felt every step he took. Karen paused just inside the doorway, letting the familiar scent of brine, varnished wood, and early morning coffee settle around her. The rusty anchor breathed differently now, the air felt steadier. The walls no longer carried the echo of someone else's ownership. They carried her imprint, quiet, deliberate, uncompromised. 1 year had passed, though the place still woke as if it remembered the chaos that once lived inside its corners. She ran her hand along the entryway rail, fingertips brushing the small nicks and dents left from decades of service industry traffic. Her thumb lingered over a splintered groove, tracing it with slow precision as if confirming that what she owned was real, not symbolic. In the far corner, Captain Miller sat with Lieutenant Hawkins, both men in civilian clothes. Their posture gave them away clean lines, heels tucked under their chairs, back straight, situational awareness never switched off. Miller's hands wrapped around a plain ceramic mug, but his grip was loose, controlled, the way a man held something when his mind was elsewhere. His gaze tracked Karen the moment she entered, not intrusive, but acknowledging. Hawkins gave a short, respectful nod, barely more than a chin dip. Across the room, Liam worked a breakfast shift, no uniform. No monitor on his ankle, just a dark apron tie at the waist and a short-sleeve shirt that showed lean muscle carved from a year of heat, labor, and sweat. The sun had left its imprint on him, deepened his skin tone, sharpened the angles of his face. His movements were steady, almost methodical. He wiped each table with the same precision he'd once used to police up roadside debris, shoulders rising and falling in a controlled rhythm. When he noticed Karen, his hand paused mid-motion. Not a freeze, just a momentary hesitation, the breath catching just enough to reveal the weight behind it. He inclined his head, respectful, not seeking approval. Simply acknowledging the person who held his past in one hand and his future in the other. Karen returned the gesture with a nod of her own, small and measured. Her expression didn't soften, but something behind her eyes shifted, a flicker of recognition, maybe even quiet pride, in a job she never asked to supervise yet carried to completion. The bar had been cleaned recently, the countertops cleaned. But what pulled her attention wasn't the neat rows of glasses or the polished taps. It was the object mounted on the wall behind the bar, encased in a thick glass shadow box, framed in burnished metal, the sealed trident, not a replica. The original pendant worn by Captain Miller during deployments he never spoke about unless necessity demanded it. Age had dulled the gold slightly, but the edges still held the hardness of earned things. Beneath it, on a minimalist brass plate, were 5 words that made her throat tighten almost imperceptibly. To Karen, "You earned this. Capt. D. Miller, USN Ref." She exhaled once through her nose, long and steady. Not emotional, controlled. But her fingers flexed at her sides, betraying something deeper. Recognition. Maybe. Gratitude she refused to dramatize. The kind of honor that didn't come in courtrooms or apologies, but in the quiet acknowledgement of someone who understood endurance as a language. Miller rose from his seat. His chair legs barely made a sound against the floor, muscle memory from decades of moving quietly under far harsher circumstances. He approached with slow, deliberate steps, not imposing. Not seeking absolution or praise. "Place looks go," he said, voice low. Karen's eyes flicked to the trident before returning to him. It should. It cost enough sweat. A faint crease tugged at the corner of Miller's mouth, a non-smile, more like the idea of one. Hawkins watched from the table, reading the room the way only a seasoned operator could, but staying respectfully back. Liam moved behind them, clearing another table. His steps were light, his presence quiet. He didn't interrupt, didn't hover, but Karen saw the brief clench of his jaw, the shallow inhale he didn't fully release until he passed by. A year of restitution had reshaped him, not erased the past, but refined the person shouldering it. Justice hadn't arrived like a storm, it hadn't broken doors or demanded applause. It had shown up at 4:30 every morning, in steel-toe boots and sunburned skin, in a young man picking up trash on the medians while traffic whirred past without looking. It had dug holes until blisters formed, then tore open, then turned into calluses. It had worked the body until the mind followed. It had rebuilt something not just in him, but in the people watching. Karen let the silence settle again, comfortable now in a way it never used to be. "Coffee?" she finally asked. Miller nodded. "Black." She moved toward the counter, shoulders loose, breath deep. The rusty anchor was hers, not from luck or pity, but from consequence, from restitution earned the long way. Behind her, Liam wiped down another table, posture straight, eyes steady. Justice didn't roar. It worked, every day. Until a boat became a man. The sun's reflection wavered across the surface of the bay like slow-moving gold as Karen walked the length of the pier, her breath visible in the cool evening air. The to-go cup in her hand radiated a small, steady warmth into her palm, grounding her. She had spent the morning buried in lease agreements, vendor contracts, and expansion blueprints, the kind of paperwork she once believed belonged to other people, people stronger or luckier than she was. Yet the signatures on those documents were hers. 2 years after a night that nearly destroyed her, she was building something that finally felt like a life. She heard footsteps before she saw him, the cadence unmistakable, measured, even, the gait of someone who'd spent decades assessing terrain before placing each step. She turned. Daniel Miller stood a few paces away. Retirement had softened his edges, but not his bearing. His hair was silver now, cut close. His jaw was still firm, but the lines around his eyes were deeper, carved by years of command decisions and sleepless nights. The windbreaker he wore shifted in the breeze, but the quiet authority that clung to him remained unshaken. "Miss Thompson," he said, voice low, steady. She nodded once. "Captain." A faint smile touched his mouth. "You can call me Daniel now." He stepped beside her and looked out over the water. His shoulders rose with a slow inhale, then lowered as if releasing months of unsaid words. His jaw flexed once, the subtle microspasm of a man rehearsing a conversation in his head before letting it happen. "Liam finished his probation in 3 months, he said. He's been accepted into a community college program, criminal justice major." Karen blinked, the small motion tightening the skin at the corners of her eyes. She didn't speak. She let the information settle, not a verdict, not a plea, just a quiet report from a father who had carried both guilt and duty longer than most men could bear. "He wants to work with at-risk teens." Daniel's gaze stayed locked on the horizon. "He wants to keep kids from becoming the person he was." Karen exhaled, the breath catching halfway through her chest before sliding out slowly. "That's good," she murmured. "That's really good." Daniel reached into his pocket, movements deliberate. Not ceremonial, but respectful. "He asked me to give you this." He extended a small envelope. Karen hesitated, a fractional pause, a reflex from too many moments where unexpected objects had meant danger or confrontation. Then she took it. Inside was a single photograph. Liam stood in the frame, leaner now, the boyish recklessness stripped from him. Dirt streaked his neck, his shirt clung damp with sweat, and sawdust coated his forearms. Beside him, a 14-year-old boy held a hammer with a grip too tight for comfort, but his grin was wide, real. Behind them, a wooden retaining wall took shape, imperfect, functional, honest. Karen's throat constricted. She turned the photo over. "I can't undo what I did. Then every day, I try to build something instead of breaking something. Thank you for demanding better of me." Liam, her fingers tightened around the edges, knuckles whitening. She didn't speak, couldn't. The air tasted metallic, the way it does before a storm, or before tears you refuse to shed in public. Daniel cleared his throat softly. "I failed him for years," he said. "You didn't." His voice barely rose above the wind. "I wanted to say, thank you, for saving my son in the one way I never could." Karen shook her head, hair shifting against her cheek. "I didn't save him." The words came out steady, controlled. "He did the work, you enforced it. Larry oversaw it, the court made it stick. All I did was survive." A faint exhale escaped Daniel, almost a laugh, not of humor, but of recognition. "And sometimes surviving," he said gently, "is what changes the world around you." Silence settled between them. Not awkward, not heavy, just honest. Daniel extended his hand. Karen looked at it for a moment, the scars, the calluses, the remnants of a life spent carrying other people's burdens. Then she reached out and took it. No bitterness, no fear. No ghosts rising from the past to whisper accusations. Just two people acknowledging the path they had walked, separate but intersecting, painful but not pointless. He nodded once and turned away, his step steady as he made his way down the pier. Karen glanced at the photograph again. Her breath eased, her shoulders lowering for the first time in what felt like years. She felt complete. Not healed in the cinematic sense, not magically free of the night that had changed everything, but grounded, whole, strong in ways she had never expected to be. She slipped the picture into her purse and walked toward the direction of her cafe, her business, her space, her future. A new chapter, a new definition of justice, a new understanding of strength, and that, she knew, was the real ending. If you want more stories as powerful and emotional as this one, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next chapter.